Hi, I'm Roger Pine from Holistiplan, and this is Winning with Holistiplan. I'm here with Lewis Robinson, CPA, and he is the managing director, senior wealth advisor at CapSouth Wealth Management. Lewis, it's such a pleasure to talk with you. Thank you for joining me today.
It's my pleasure, very much so.
And Lewis, we connected. I think one of the things that they had in mind for us when we connected was you are and this makes me a little terrified to talk to you. This is where the imposter syndrome comes in, but you are a real CPA. Unlike me, you're a real CPA, practiced as a CPA for, I think, many decades before transitioning to wealth management. Let me know if I got that wrong.
No, you're correct. Absolutely.
Okay. And so what I would be interested in hearing from you is, since you've been on both sides of the aisle, tax prep, I'm sure you've been watching your colleagues over the last few weeks getting to the deadline on the tax prep side. There's tax prep and then there's tax planning. And now you've been on both sides of that. And some could argue that they should be one process rather than two distinct ones. But what's different? Like now that you're in a tax planning mode, what's different in your mindset, in your processes, and maybe even like the tools you use, how you emphasize getting that done right?
Let me tell you that let's talk about the mindset first.
Okay.
I'm a CPA. I got a stack of tax returns to do over here, a big stack. I'm charging by the hour to do that work. If I take some time to call a client for planning, that's time I'm going to have to charge.
Mm-hmm.
It's time away from those tax returns I need to get out the door. Then if I do that, and if I send a bill to that client, they're not going to want to pay that extra amount for that time planning that I talked to them about. So it's a natural reaction, I think, of the CPA not to instigate the planning, because you're going to get resistance from the billing. The client doesn't know he needs it and certainly don't want to pay for something. And, not all cases when you do planning or looking at a tax return, you don't always find something. And so the client doesn't really want to pay for that. And I think it's just a natural thing that the planning does not get done for particularly individuals who only have a 1040 tax return. Now, if you have a business return, they'll charge it to your business and everybody's fine with that. But the individuals, it's just something you don't do. And as a CPA, you don't get involved with the calculations anymore. You don't look at the IRMA calculations. You don't look at how Social Security is taxed. You don't look at the exclusions from your local state, which Georgia has them, because it's all done by the computer. You don't see what's happening. All you know is the results. But when you're doing the planning, you have to learn what those things are. And the fact that you had $1,000 worth of income and you're in the 22% bracket, I think maybe a 12, it doesn't always put you in the 12% bracket because the taxability of Social Security, for instance.
Right.
So you see all those things start to come together. And as you're doing the planning, you look for, why did this change? This is not what I thought. But as a CPA, you're just getting a tax return out the door and you're not really looking at that.
So there's a business model piece to it. There's a client expectations piece to it. I remember what you're talking about. I would have a chat with the CPA about some planning thing, because sometimes we still have to involve the CPA, obviously, the tax professional, and the client would get a bill for $70 or something like that, some tiny fraction of what they're paying the financial advisor. And the client would be ballistic about that. They would go ballistic about those $70. And so, yeah, I get it. You get pushed back on that enough times and you're like, you know what, I'm not going to get in that game at all. I understand.
And you got this stack of returns here and you're working ungodly hours to start with. You certainly want to put more hours. You're going to get people complaining about what you charge for.
Got it. So you've seen the light, you've crossed over to the advisory side of the aisle. And, so we talked about mindset and business model. What changed about your set of tools, your tech stack, how you approached providing tax planning versus tax prep? Because theoretically, you could use the same tools. Like you could actually use, I don't know, Lacert, or, the actual product you use to prep the returns, you could use that to build out the future. I know some CPAs do that. How did that kind of change in your mind as you moved across?
Well, in the past, I probably have used TurboTax to do that with because it's cheaper and easier to use. But the problem with the planning process for the CPA, you got to use normally something like Lacert has one, used to be BNA, now it's Bloomberg. All of those are very complicated. They work all right as long as you're preparing the return and the data feeds automatically from the software to that software. But if you're looking at a return and you got to get that information in one of those tax planning softwares, you're talking about a lot of work, and it's usually fairly complicated because that software is like putting the information into a tax return. It's not just summary information. When your product first came out, I said, that ain't going to work. It's just not going to work. I've been
I said
using
that too.
That BNA, they can't compete with that. Well, it didn't take me very long to find out, no, they've got something here. They got an incredible product because, one, I don't have to have a specialties to enter that data into the software to do the analysis. It's when I upload the tax return, it's there. And just that one step itself makes it worth a lot of money. Well, I shouldn't tell you that, you'll be increasing your fees.
I'm making a note right now. Yeah.
But it does make it worth a lot of money to be able to do that.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, that was something that, I mean, back in my days as advisor, we used a different product. It wasn't BNA. And yeah, like the hardest part was just getting that first amount of data in. And typically you would send it off to a paraplanner or associate advisor and say, just get last year's return to match. Just enter all the data so you can at least match within X% last year's return, because then you at least know you're close. And then you got to take that and copy it forward.
Right.
And so, yeah, if you could just read in the return, it saves a lot. It saves a lot of that upfront work.
And the summary is some cases that may be sort of irritating. I don't have the detail, like I don't have every schedulee, but it's better to have that than have to have 10 or 15 or whatever it is. It's better to have that summary. And it hadn't been a challenge, the lack of detail that Holistiplan has as opposed to one of those full-blown software programs.
Yeah, and candidly, that's the hard part for us from a design perspective, right? Is like, how do you capture just enough detail to be useful, but not too much as to make it unusable? Well, not unusable, but so complicated that you've gone over to the point where the data entry takes forever. And that's always a line that we're walking. That's very difficult on the product side for us. One of the things we're working on, I'll tip my hand a little bit here. Like in the next few months, we're kind of looking to roll out 2 versions, like the advanced version and like the basic version. And so if you needed that extra detail, maybe there's a way to kind of flip a switch and say, I do want to go down that road of all that data entry, but you still have the route to not do it. We'll see how that comes together. But yeah, that's the challenge on our side, is building that out without making it as complicated as the tax code,
And as the advisor, then there's some things you just need to look for and do. For instance, one of the first things we do when we upload a tax return, if we have a Roth conversion, we go in and we show that Roth conversion because we want to know what that is historically going forward.
Yeah, great. Well, speaking of Roth conversions, I don't know I'd be interested in hearing what your favorite tax planning strategy is. Maybe it's a Roth, maybe it's something else. Like, what's your favorite kind of go-to, I don't know, thing you'll pound the table for clients on?
It's Roth conversions. I'm a firm believer in it. Believe it or not, there's some of the CPAs said you shouldn't pay the tax up front, but there's a lot of reasons that I think you should. Telling a client, even, younger clients who have 401ks and not using the Roth, tell me, what do you do with the tax savings? because you're going to need that money in retirement, but you didn't save it. I think a lot of cases you'd be better off to don't spend as much money so you have a Roth. So I'm a firm believer of the Roth to have that money tax-free when it comes to you in retirement. And we use the software to look at the different plateaus. Where do we need to be? Is it going to create more taxability of our Social Security? Is it going to get us into another bracket? Because what I urge and tell clients, I want to keep your bracket as flat as I can over your lifetime. And that is one of the objectives that I'm trying to do is to do that. And we use the qualified charitable distributions, the QCDs, is also, because that's a huge tax savings too. And it also lowers your income, which means you can do more Roth conversion at the same time.
Wow. So you're still doing them in people's 70s and 80s, as long as they don't need that money. Yeah.
Yes.
It's an estate planning tool. It's an RMD reduction tool. Yeah.
Well, the other thing I always ask the client is that you want me to do planning for you or your family? I have very few that say just for me. Well, I said, if that's the case, let's look and see how much money you're going to leave to your heirs. Do you want to reduce the amount that's going out for taxes, or do you want your heirs to pay that tax? Well, that's where the Roth conversions comes in, because you reduce the amount of tax that the heirs will eventually pay on that money because their parents are paying at their lower bracket, particularly when you have kids who are high earners. And then in our state, there's a pretty good exclusion on retirement income. Well, the parents can get that exclusion, but typically if it's going to go to their kids, and especially with this 10-year payout, they'll be paying Georgia tax, where good chance the parents might not even be paying the Georgia tax.
Interesting. Huh. Yeah. Yeah. And what I love about that answer, Roth and QCDs, is I think when you go to conferences and stuff like that, and you hear about tax planning, you're thinking complicated stuff. I mean, that's the stuff we enjoy hearing about in a conference, what is it? What's when you give property and it's a conservation easement type stuff. I've done like one of those in my entire career, but I've done a million Roth conversions, and so it's sometimes those bread and butter things are really what, that's what year after year after year provides value for clients. And then at the end, it's not the complexity that it's valuable. It's just reminding the clients to do it every year, and then also being able to communicate it out. And so that's one question I have for you is, how do you communicate the concept of, say, the Roth conversion? For example, if, say, they're tax professionals, like, why would you pay the tax up front now? Like, how do you justify it? What sort of language do you use, or visuals do you try to put together for a client on that?
Well, I use the Holistiplan in a lot of cases to show before and after. And in occasions, I have gone out like 10 and 15 years to show projections, even go so far as to project out what the RMDs will be if you didn't do a Roth conversion, project out what they would be if you're doing the Roth conversion, because those drop out. And that's one of the things I'd like to see Holistiplan maybe go out 10 years instead of 5, so that I could do more of that. But there was a program that AICPA had. There's a spreadsheet, Excel spreadsheet actually, that you could put that in and calculate out. And it was pretty good, but it wasn't anything like like Holistiplan, but it was a way of projecting out those, and you're saving a lot of money for clients. And we use that also for suggesting maybe you should look at insurance premiums if you're young enough to pay that tax. Many years ago, when people owed estate tax, you had a lot of insurance agents making a lot of money selling insurance products to pay the estate tax. Well, that's gone for a lot of people, but that income tax is not gone. Plus, you got a quicker payout, which means you're going to have probably a higher rate. And so I had a client for his planning. He and his wife had a large pension. And they had a large IRA, and that wasn't drawing on it. And his kids were very successful. I said, well, they're going to wind up paying a lot of tax. Why don't you look at it? And he was young enough to get a last to die policy. I said, why don't you look at getting an insurance policy to pay that tax? I don't need an insurance. And I kept on, and I finally presented it to him. I said, what I want you to look at, we're going to do some projections. So I'm going to show you how much you're going to leave. And I want you to consider to taking their money to pay the insurance premium. I want you to take their money to pay the tax you're going to owe so that you'll leverage what they're going to get. And when I put it that way, then he bought it.
Interesting. Yeah. That's a good example of where, you know, a tactical planning tool like Holistiplan gives you some information, but then you need a projection type tool also to kind of show that longer term impact. I do have some good news for you, Lewis, that you'll see in the next, I hope this quarter, regarding your wish for us to go out longer in many more years. So stay tuned on that. Okay. Yeah, that's helpful. Yeah. So I guess my last question for you is, it's been really interesting for me as a new tech entrepreneur to watch over our few years of existence, the waves of adoption, right? So in the first 9 months or so, it was your classic early adopters, right? They love it. They're trying every new product. They buy the product based on the promise of what it can do, sometimes more even than what it can do. And then you have your kind of later adopters, and there's probably a 20-to-1 of that. And then there's even beyond that, there's a 20-to-1 of the folks who are kind of like, I don't really need this at all. Like, you got to, I'm only going to buy it when I'm the one guy left who isn't. I don't want to feel left out. You know, like there are these kind of waves, and there's books about it called Crossing the Chasms, a famous book about this. I don't know, where would you say you sit on the early adopter to late adopter spectrum as far as technology goes?
Well, I'll tell you what, that people used to call me as a younger person and still do, is a gadget man. So that probably tells you where I am.
Got it. Interesting.
I'm usually out front. I still got the Apple IIe at home.
Fun. Yeah. Still functional or?
No.
No, that's too bad.
No, but I'm an early adopter. I always have been, because I like technology, and I think technology is incredible. That's the only thing about getting old is you're going to miss out on some great things in your life because you're not there to see them.
Yeah, but it shows you don't have to miss out while you're still working, right? I mean, it's not too late to say, I've been doing it this way for 10 years, but I've got another X number of years ahead of me, and I have a team now, and I have to make sure that my team is delivering.
Right.
And so investing in technology is part of that. Yeah. Okay. So good to know. You're a gadget guy. You'll be on the front end of whatever new stuff we have to push out there. I can count on you to beta test it for me, maybe.
Yeah, I've got every product there as far as computers.
Got it. Okay. Well, those are all the questions I had for you, Lewis. One of the things we do every time we do one of these calls is we give people a chance to ask me an unrehearsed question, as difficult or as awkward as you want it to be. I'm perfectly happy to answer it. Did you have a question for me you wanted to try to ask?
It's either a question or a request. I'm not sure. It's probably maybe both. Okay. One of the things I do for us the planning process is when I put the program, I put it to data or get it into Holistiplan and calculate the tax. Then I put it in a spreadsheet to show that tax. Thank goodness y'all added Georgia, because that was a big deal, because I used to have to calculate that. But since you had Georgia, I appreciate that. Mm-hmm. But the other thing that I put on that column, I show the federal tax, Georgia tax, and the Medicare premium.
Mm-hmm.
I do that without, say, the Roth conversion.
Yeah.
All right, so if you do a $50,000 Roth conversion, what is the federal tax, the state tax? What is my ARMA charge?
Yep.
And then that's the tax that I look at, is that's my real cost. Mm-hmm. I wish Holistiplan, y'all put the effective rate, but it would be nice at the bottom that show this is the total tax incurred because of this change. And you can just have column A. I mean, one scenario is without it, second scenarios with it. And the difference is the tax cost, which includes the IRMA premium.
Mm. Yeah, we do have the IRMA premiums down below. If you scroll all the way down, we do have Part B and
Right.
D.
Yeah, I want
on
to see a
there.
total. I want the total. If it's a couple, I want to see it.
Yeah. So you want to see all in federal tax, state tax,
total IRMA,
Part
total
B and
Medicare.
D, Medicare extras.
Right.
That way you have a
cost.
dollar amount for the whole Roth conversion.
Right.
And then you can say Roth was $50,000, incremental cost was this.
And the percentage is this.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I do manually after I go through Holistiplan, is to show this is my effective cost.
Right.
And sometimes it's worth incurring that IRMA premium if the effective cost stays low enough.
Totally. Yeah. I think that makes a ton of sense. I'll tell you, like, I kind of hinted at it, but we're working on going one more level deeper than what you get with scenario analysis. So like what you just talked about, which is I want to be able to run a projection. I want to be able to, let's say I want to do some strategy this year, QCD or Roth or whatever, but I want to know what the impact is on me 20 years from now. I want to be able to show the client, like, look how much richer you are when you're 100 years old, that sort of thing. That's not our specialty, but we can certainly give some directionally accurate calculations on that. And it's true, as a starting point, we have to make sure that we incorporate federal, state, and the Medicare costs. So, when we start off there. And I think that's something that I'm really interested in doing this year. Is scenario analysis is a tool for calculating things, but now we need a way to communicate concepts, right? It's not enough to just be able to do the math. We have to build a way to communicate. Like, anytime someone has a spreadsheet outside of your system, that means they've invested time and effort in a feature that you could have built into the system, right? They value it enough that they built it, right? As opposed to people who are like, can you just create a flight simulator? And you're like, what are you talking about? But if they actually built a flight simulator on the side, that to me is a key. And so when I hear about people like you who are building additional pieces that are helping to communicate some of these concepts, I'm thinking we need to build that into the product. That needs to be a thing that we have.
And to start with, if it was just you could export it to Excel, so you got the data, and all you got to do is add whatever.
Sure. Yeah. Well, especially for those who are, who kind of have that infrastructure already built for kind of communicating that stuff out. But some folks are like, just make it easy on me. And we can give them, I guess you give them both. Some of them want the pre-built report and some might want the raw data. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, that wasn't too awkward. I was mostly ready for that question. So thank you for that. So the last question that I have for you is, this one's back at you. And so the series we call like Winning Big with Holistiplan, but we do all kinds of big things in our lives. And we always try to ask the question, what's the most epic thing that you've done in your life, or noteworthy thing that was like a big, epic, amazing thing you'd like to share?
I think the biggest thing, at least what I had to go through and where it wound up, was at age 51, I had been working with a private company as a treasurer, and I decided to go back into CPA practice. And I was not in the community where I had my CPA practice before. And so I had to decide on where do I want to open this office. And I went to a community that I didn't know anybody.
Wow.
I had two founders of the business. I kept their individual work, it was just individual work. So in 91, at age 51, I opened my accounting practice in a community that I didn't know anybody. And then I retired from that. We had like 21 or 22 people on the staff when I retired from it. So, and that was not easy. It was a hard go, but it was, that's probably the biggest thing, because that was a lot of hard work.
Yeah.
A lot of, I'm not going to give up.
Yeah. That's a big leap at any age, but yeah, that's a big leap when it would have been easier to just say, I'm going to bide my time over here.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, kudos to you. I'm glad you made that move, and I'm glad that you made the move also over to financial advising, because it's been a pleasure to work with you and your firm, and a pleasure talking with you today. Thank you so much for doing that with me.
Well, it's you and Jeff are my heroes, and I put Debbie in there too. And
Oh yeah.
if people don't know Debbie, she's those other two are through Horse's Mouth, where I've worked with them some, and they're all three all incredible people. And I'm just glad y'all are around doing what you do.
Well, it's a pleasure.
I don't know how you have the hours in the day to do it, but I'm glad you do.
Well, I can speak for Jeff because I know how he feels about it, but we're inspired by the people who are doing the work with clients. Like, we have to be there to make sure that you're able to put your best foot forward for more clients. Like my move was in my early 40s, but I was a financial advisor, and I was like, I want to see if I can take this planning knowledge I have and make sure it goes out to more than just, the 100 clients I had. And so that's what inspires me, is to get up and try to make sure that advisors like you can just get more better planning out to thousands and thousands of people. So
this is much more enjoyable than tax returns. I'll tell you that, much more, because
I
you really
believe
feel like you're doing something. At the end of the day, has accomplished something for a client that's made a difference in their life and their children's life. Whereas tax returns, you're just, unfortunately, you're doing a lot of what Congress, it's not the old tax laws that used to be. It's enforcement of regulations and everything else unrelated to taxes.
You're kind of like preparing someone's invoice for them,
Right.
And it's not, I will say that's one thing I do miss from my financial advisory days. Like, you get to, when you have that conversation with a client about that QCD or that Roth conversion, and that light bulb goes off, and they see the benefit, the actual dollar benefit to them, which I think is very rewarding. And you can get it's a very short-term reward too. You can save money right now. It's not just a theoretical 30 years from now thing. Now in my job, I don't get those stories as much as I used to, right? Because I don't have clients, and we'll talk to an advisor and they'll be like, yep, great. And then they'll go off, and then we don't hear how the story ends about how we'll find a mistake on a return. We'll say, hey, I think your client can refile and get another $4,000 back. And the advisor's like, thanks. And then you don't get to hear the end of the story.
No, you don't. Right. No. Now, one of the things I meant to mention, and if I've got time, is the other thing we use a lot of, Roger, is the donor advised funds.
Mm-hmm.
We use that a lot I do a lot of charitable planning, and I basically try to communicate people that generally today, because the standard deduction is high, that you need to do charitable planning either through a donor advised fund or QCD. And we use a combination. Typically, somebody younger, we try to pre-fund donor advised funds in batches until they get to 70 and a half, before they can start doing the QCDs. And that's been very effective for our clients too.
Yeah, these days you don't even have to do, I think once it got so high, the standard deduction, that even people who did every other year, they're like, forget it. But you could still do a donor advised fund once every 4 years or 5 years.
Right.
And
the farther
get
out,
that
the better.
Yeah,
the farther out, the better off you get. I've got one client, I think we did as much as 8 years pre-funded. Usually I try to get, if somebody is 62, let's try to get out 8 years.
Wow.
Till you're 70 and a half.
Get all the way to QCD age.
Right.
Interesting. Well, I love it, Lewis. We could probably talk about this stuff all day, because I love this stuff too.
Yeah, I'm sure we could.
So like I said, I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for, supporting Holistiplan, being an early adopter, being a gadget guy who gave Holistiplan a try, and has helped us improve the product through your feedback and advisors like you. And this has just been a real pleasure talking with you today. Thank you.
Well, likewise. And again, thank you again for such a fantastic product.
No, well, thanks.